factories and very loud places. So if I talk too loudly, please let me know. Type of this presentation, I think I've got half an hour, so I can delve down into a couple of areas of detail. The type of the presentation is building Ireland's first commercial cybersecurity laboratory. So most of the other speakers you're going to have today are going to talk about IT, and I'm going to talk specifically about IT security, and then within that I'm going to talk about cybersecurity, which has a different definition. We'll get on to that.
Hi. Hey, Eugene. Nice to see you again. How are you? Very good.
So, Espion, the company I work for, I'm not going to give you a big sales pitch about who they are and what they do, but it's worthwhile if you're going to listen to me for half an hour, at least understanding we have a certain level of credentials in order to talk about these sorts of things. I won't go through them all, but the interesting ones are probably the certified ethical hackers and the forensics, certified forensics qualification. So you won't find an awful lot of companies in Ireland that have those sorts of capabilities. Credentials for research and development. So I run an 8-man team, research and development team at Espion. We focus on 3 areas. We have an innovation centre which we use for internal use, so we identify process improvements within our company and roll those out over time, and we do the same for customers. We have a product and service development, development. We are in the business of producing new products and developing new services and solutions for our customers. As far as research is concerned, and credentials are, we're currently running 4 EU projects, applied funding projects. I won't go into detail about all of them. Camino, though, is a cyber terrorism roadmap for Europe project. Ecosian is a huge €22 million project, 3-year project, that is looking at centralising control and capability for countering cybercrime, cyber terrorism, specifically centred around what's called critical infrastructure for Europe. And I'll come on to that term in a little while. Another one called SORSOC, which is all about, the title is Situational Awareness for Secure Operations Centres, similar sort of thing. It merges 2 kinds of technology, which I'll come on to, IT and something called OT. And finally, PAXO, which is an innovation project. It's innovation for cyber security for small to medium enterprises. So, cyber laboratory. Being English, I'm linguistically challenged and can't actually pronounce that word. I can manage cyber, but I can't manage the other word. But what I would say is, for those of you who can speak the language, is that the right spelling? Anyone know? Well, I don't feel so bad. I've persuaded my boss. My boss has all the meeting rooms in the whole of Espion are named in the Irish language. And I set him the challenge of trying to identify what a cyber laboratory was in the Irish, and that's what he came up with. So I'd love to be able to go back to him and say, that sign you produced for us, you spelled it wrong. There we go. So, I work in research. Research is all about defining the terms before you start. And being English, I thought what I'd do is I'd address the font of all knowledge when it comes to definitions, the Oxford English Dictionary, to try and identify what a cyber laboratory actually is. Unfortunately, that's the result that I get back, and that seems to be fairly common. So, I looked elsewhere. Cyber lab, I've got a pretty good definition from a cyber laboratory that's actually in the UAE, where I worked a few years ago, in Sharjah, I think. CyberLab is a virtual repository of technical and an ideal knowledge partner providing quality solutions for cybersecurity in simulation to site. Apologies for the English language, but that's the way they define it. And next we need a definition of what cybersecurity is. So I go to NIST, the American Standards Organization. Cybersecurity is the state of being protected against the criminal and unauthorized use of electronic data or the measures taken to achieve this. Fairly self-explanatory, hopefully, apart from electronic data. What does electronic data mean? Being English, I decided to consult the font of all knowledge on definitions, and that's what I got from the online Oxford English Dictionary website. So I'll define it myself. Electronic data, in my terms, is any data stored or processed by electronic means in any and all IT or ICS OT system. I'll explain what they are. IT, we all know, information technology, of course, the subject of all these seminars today. ICS and OT stands for Industrial Control Systems and or Operational Technology. The two terms are fairly interchangeable, along with a third term called SCADA, which I'll come on to in a second. So the interesting thing here, and hopefully it's interesting to you if you're IT type people, is the industrial control systems part of it. Industrial control systems are between 2 and 3 times the size of the whole IT market globally. They're not as well understood, certainly by the IT community, but substantially larger than the IT industry. So I'll speak a little bit about information technology and operations technology, OT. This is just an article I pulled off the web when I was going through things. It's written by an institute called Hazar, which is a Turkish research foundation. And basically, it's quite small wording, but it talks about do IT people really understand operational technology? And the answer that comes out at the bottom is possibly, but certainly not completely. They are very, very different, and I'll explain why in a little more detail. So, right, we now have definitions for cybersecurity and CyberLab. If you're going to set up a CyberLab, it might be worthwhile adopting 1 or 2 internationally recognised standards. So these are the standards that we're applying to our CyberLab here in Dublin. IEC 17025, which is a standard for running laboratories. Basically, it's all to do with record keeping, calibration of equipment, and test results, and those sorts of things. Works just as well in a cyber laboratory as it does in a pharmaceutical laboratory or anything else. So that's the standard for running a laboratory. IEC 62443 is the overall overarching standard for ICS or OT systems. I'll talk about that in a little more detail because that's my area of expertise. And the final standard is IEC 27001, which is the standard for security in IT environments, part of the standard. So those are the 3 standards that apply. I need a standard to run a laboratory, I need a standard for the OT ICS part of the business, and I need a standard for the IT business that we're in. So a quick word about SCADA. Now, these terms change depending on which slides I use. ICS, OT, and SCADA are virtually the same thing. There are some small differences, but it's not worth discussing. So I'll talk a little bit briefly about SCADA systems in general. As I said, 2 or 3 times the size of IT systems globally. I drove here. I live on the west coast, Galway, and it takes me about 3 hours to get here. And I thought I'd conduct a little exercise while I was driving here this morning. I interacted with exactly one IT device, which is the mobile phone, which I was using hands-free, so it was fine. I interacted with 23 SCADA systems getting here. Traffic lights, toll gates, all kinds of different automated systems, the majority of which are critical infrastructure. the traffic lights in Dublin decided to pack up, we wouldn't get much work done during the day. The trains are another example. If the Dart or the Lewis stopped working, they're full of Starling. People wouldn't be able to get to work. So there are an awful lot of automated systems that we just take for granted every day because they nearly always work. And that's the point about industrial control systems. They are written and used to be available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We don't have downtime on traffic lights because people are driving 24 hours a day. Very different from IT systems and very different in terms of how you secure them, which I'll come on to. So I'll give you a couple of real-life examples of where they got it wrong for security with industrial control systems. Some of these you might have heard about, some of them you might not. It goes back 15, 16 years. Gazprom in Russia, a big explosion that happened in 2000. An Australian treatment plant was hacked in 2001. There was a large power outage in the US that was accredited to people of an Asian persuasion, which affected huge swathes of the US. An Ohio nuclear plant was attacked with a slammer worm. In 2008, in Lodz City, there was a disgruntled employee in Lodz who, after he'd been fired, decided he'd play train sets with the tram network in the city and managed to crash four trams before they got him. Saudi Aramco, you might have heard about in 2012. I was there when that happened. It wasn't my fault, and I wasn't working for Aramco, but I did get called in to try and help. 10% of the world's oil was not endangered because the two systems, the IT systems and the industrial control systems, were separated, thankfully. But if they had been joined, and I'll come on to that as a common cause, you've only got to think about, it took them 3 weeks to sort out the problems that were associated with that particular attack. The multi-vector, 3 or 4 different types of attack, all coordinated, all happening at the same time. Very clever. 30,000 computers were taken offline and the data wiped off all of them. 2003, Dragonfly with malware, again another multi-vector attack against the Ukrainian power grid, all to do with Ukraine, Russia, and those sorts of things, which I won't go into. 70,000 homes affected by the power grid going down. So you can see big impacts when you start talking about industrial control systems, especially critical infrastructure. Illustrate one of those, that 2003 outage. There's the US in all its glory in the middle of the night, and that was the situation in 2003. There was about 8-9% of the country was without power for a significant amount of time. Quick word on statistics for industrial control systems. This is a US chart. They have a thing called ICS, Industrial Control System CERT. CERT stands for Computer Emergency Response Team. It's a central organisation, sort of a bit like DHS, but not quite. They're far more technical. And a couple of interesting facts out of this. This is 2014 data. 2015 isn't out yet. The first thing is, there were only 254 attacks. I don't believe there were only 254 attacks. There were only 254 reported attacks in the US during that period of time. That's one interesting thing. The other interesting thing is that 38% of all the attacks were unknown. Not a great deal of effort is put into these things, and this is a symptom of the kinds of systems we're looking at with critical infrastructure industrial control systems. When you secure IT systems, there's a nomenclature called CIA, criticality, integrity and availability. They're the order in which your data should be secured. So confidentiality, integrity and availability. What's most important in the IT world is that the data remains confidential. Even if it's not available, it's confidential. It hasn't been read by people it shouldn't be read. The next most important thing is integrity. So the data needs to be right. So it needs to be secret where it's secret, and it needs to be right when it's right. And finally, availability, which is the least important of the security aspects. That's for IT systems. It's completely the opposite with industrial control systems. The most important thing, as I've already said, is availability, then integrity, and then confidentiality. No one cares in the industrial control systems world whether the data remains confidential or not. And in a lot of cases it doesn't really matter that much, but in some cases it does. If you're a pharmaceutical company and you're running industrial control systems to control your processes, your laboratory processes, centrifuges, etc., and the process by which drugs are made, for example, or materials are made, then that recipe that you use is very, very important to you. That is your intellectual property. That recipe is stored in industrial control systems, not in IT systems. And then that's where we start to have problems. So, not very many reported. I think a lot more went unreported. And a good percentage, they never got to the bottom of. They never managed to identify what the particular problems were. Talk a little bit more about SCADA. I'm not going to go through all of these in great detail, but if you run across these things, the most important thing to realise is that industrial control systems are made up of IT and industrial control systems. And if you look at that there, you can see two different networks, a red network and a green network. The point of industrial control systems, and the easiest way to keep them secure, is to make sure they're separate. And you can see here, this is a really bad example because those two networks are connected every time there's a workstation. That's a single point with both networks going in, which is an easy access point for people who mean you harm. It's actually called an air gap in the parlance of this industry, and that was the point I was making about Aramco over there. The two networks, the two complete systems were completely separate, nothing connecting either, which isn't the case with most organisations. That's why we created a cyber lab. A couple more, there's just some terms here. RTUs, which I'll use later on, is telemetry unit, remote telemetry unit. And the other term is HMI. In the IT world it would be a GUI, in the industrial world it's a HMI, human-machine interface. And there's an interesting point. You connect the HMI SCADA server to the network with a thing called RS-232, which if you're old like me, you'll remember is a serial protocol from 40, 50 years ago. Before we had network PCs, if you had a printer, you would connect it either using a serial or a parallel port to your computer. It's exactly the same protocol that is used throughout industrial control systems. They are that old and are not updated. And the reason those sorts of protocols are used is because they work, because availability is the most important thing in industrial control systems. Another couple, you can network all of these things together. There's a thing called DCS, Distributed Control Systems. When you have a nationwide automation system, which I'd like to be an example, or the control software controlling trains across the country, you'll very often distribute control. So you're one step removed from the actual control. You delegate control to a local area controller. Which causes problems because things then become far more complicated. Standalone, this is another example of a standalone system. In its basis form, you have to have a HMI, you have to have a way of interacting with the human-machine interface, you have to have a way of upgrading and configuring the software that's needed. You have to have a processor. These things tend to be called PLCs, programmable logic controllers. And then you have the output and input, whatever it's connected to, whether you are going to control something or whether you're just going to receive data from something, I/O typically. And here's a real-life example. So there's a SCADA system in most cars, for example, and it controls the air conditioning inside your car. The human-machine interface is the dashboard control, where you set the control that you actually want. It reads back and tells you what the temperature is inside the car. That's obviously not just a button that's not attached to anything. There's a whole series of wiring, and somewhere in there will be one of these, which is an actuator that controls a vent that opens and closes air, or switches on or off a compressor that compresses air that gives you cold air or warm air. SCADA system. They're a simple, basic form. That's a SCADA system. Going back to those standards, IEC 62443 was actually a version of a standard that was brought out in the US 5 years before that, called ISO 99. ISO 99 has now become 62443. And here's an example of a model that we use to when we're looking at risk assessing these types of systems. It's bottom up, so right at the bottom we've got something called field devices, which are those little I/O things, the things that actually move things around in real time, in real space. Set of basic controls, supervisory network. Remember I said you can distribute these things, and then typically you have a plant operations network. And the interesting thing about these is that there's different data that flows between these different levels, and this standard allows you to segregate systems so that you can put levels of control between the different operational elements of the network. So at the base level, you've got these RS-232 commands going backwards and forwards that are saying open this, close that, what's that temperature, what's that gate valve doing, all of these things going on at once. And then as you work up the stack, you get more supervisory activities. At some point, things stop being a question of read this, what's that, open this command, and start becoming a lot more feature rich. And we get things like, I worked for 10 years at Land Rover plant in Birmingham, and as part of that we had to build a new paint shop. Paint shop is 1/3 of all of Land Rover's operations. Actually building and painting the paint shop is a very big, intensive process that has to be rigorously quality controlled. You get fluff and sand in paint, and you can cause tens of thousands of pounds worth of damage, or it can affect the whole paint shop if things start going wrong. So we've got lots of reads and writes for these things whizzing around getting painted, but at some point Land Rover want to know how much green paint they've used on a particular day versus the day before. That information, part of the recipe, how the paint is mixed, and is in the industrial control system. Unfortunately, the people that want that information aren't. They're in some office somewhere in purchasing or quality or whatever else, and they're sitting on the IT network. So what they do, they start connecting into the plant network so that they can read this sort of stuff, which bridges that air gap that I talked about, which allows all the malware that's in the IT systems to flow into the industrial control systems and wreak havoc. So this standard is there, put in place so that you can put controls at different places where they're needed. Further up you go, eventually someone in the plant's going to want to access the internet. Dangerous, very, very dangerous thing, full of nasty beasties, and shouldn't be connected to an industrial control system, but they do. And this standard enables you or helps you to put the right levels of control in to do that. So that is the standard that we would benchmark against when we're doing risk assessments for industrial control systems. Right, quick word about what the Cyber Lab actually does and why we built it. We're predominantly looking at industrial control and SCADA networks. I'm waiting for the day when the Irish government starts rolling out smart meters, because hopefully they won't be very secure and I'll get lots of money actually testing them and telling them that's wrong. Anything that begins with the word smart is great news for me, because it's inherently insecure. Brilliant. I can't think of anything more stupid than putting 1 million electric smart meters, one in every home, under the stairs with an Ethernet connection. I don't know how many hackers there are in Ireland, but if there's 4 or 5, they're going to sit all day, every day, under the stairs, just trying to hack into the power grid. So did in all my travels over 20 years in the UK is in Airbus in Newport in Wales, which is a fantastic place if you get the chance to go there. They've got all sorts of things. They've got mock-ups of water pumping stations, and periodically something goes wrong and everyone gets sprayed with water. They've got a smart city that's like a train set model thing that works in real time. A couple of standards institutes, NIST I've already mentioned. BSI, British Standards Institute, they're a strategic partner with Espion, and they're helping me develop a standard specifically for cyber labs. And IASME is another standards organisation we use. What's different about us? So you'll hear that other people have research labs. The difference with ours is it's really fulfills two goals. It helps with the research work that we're doing. It enables us to generate data and try things out in a safe environment. We don't want to be flinging malware around over the internet and walking around with it. It's all better if it's in one place that's guarded and controlled and isolated from the rest of the world. But as I said, there are cyber labs already, but they're nearly always supportive research, which is one of our focuses. The other use for ours is component testing and actually product assurance, which is where we're trying to get to with these standards. So, I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a utilities company in Ireland that's hired us to look at a particular RTU, remote telemetry device, to see how secure it is. We bring it into our lab, we run a series of tests through it, and go back and tell them how secure or not it is. There's an RTU. That's the sort of usage for these things. They're out in the middle of nowhere, unattended, need to be secure. Half a dozen different interfaces for these sorts of things, all of which we need to test. Some things you'll know, like web services, other things you won't, like serial communications ports. So complicated bits of kit with lots of security holes, potential holes. That's the design of the cyber lab. It's segmented as per that standard that I was talking about. Enables us to plug and play different devices in different places in a controlled environment. Last slide. Challenges we face along the way. As I said, this is the first one that I'm aware of. I know the research lab in Queen's University in Belfast. That's the formal one. It's typically a research thing. This is a commercial lab that earns its own keep, that pays for itself with commissioned work. Biggest challenge we had was skills mix, not surprisingly. I'm an engineer. I just happen to have spent 30 years in IT, but I'm a bit of an anomaly from that point of view. It is very hard to find somebody with both sets of skills, IT and industrial control systems. People tend to be one or the other, and they don't talk the same language very often. That was our biggest challenge. Another challenge is equipment. This stuff's really hard to get. It's really hard to get for free or cheap. These things are very expensive. Typically, a power plant, 10 million. And you don't buy a bag of bits, you hire somebody to build the whole thing for you, and it's bespoke and everyone's different. Very hard to get equipment just to use in a test environment. If any of you here have this type of equipment, I'd love you to either gift it me or give it me. A lot of it's lying around, a lot of it is old these days, but companies don't like giving it away just because they don't have a mechanism for doing it. Scala vendor support, as I've already said, these people that make this sort of stuff, they like $10 million projects. They don't like 10 cents, $5, whatever it is. They're in it for the big bucks. Liabilities is another one. Very often there's an energy company in Ireland that is hiring us to do a complete risk assessment of their automation systems, but they want us to do it in a live environment. So it's the equivalent of penetration testing. You know that term. You come in from the internet and you try and break something, which is great. If you manage it, people are without whatever energy this company provides. so not good, really, from a liability perspective. And especially with SCADA, these things they're in real time. You know, if you take over control of a device and press the wrong button, something whizzes around and chops someone's head off. It's a very dangerous thing. So liabilities is another challenge for us. And as I said, a specific cyber lab standards. We're in the process of generating one for our own cyber lab with the help of the SI. And when we have that, we'll be the best there is. That's it. Any questions? Yes.
Well, I'd just like to point out that the spelling was wrong.
Was it? Thank you.
Google Translate.
Thank you very much.
The reason I checked is that Microsoft started off with tested measurements.
Yeah.
And in a moment of inattention, they ended up in IT.
Ah, there we go. Thank you. I'll find the spelling off you later and see if I can annoy my boss. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your time.